Okay, welcome back everybody. What I want to do is start today with looking at, before we get back to the religion, we're going to talk a little bit maybe tomorrow about Indian Ocean trade. And I thought you should understand what the monsoons are. In India, one of the things India has going for it is it's in the middle of a lot of trade routes. You have the Silk Road that travels up here above India all the way to the Middle East. So all kinds of spices and stuff would come through India sometimes on its way to Europe. But what really helped India was being the midpoint for the sea lanes and the sea routes between China and the Western world, which would be on this side. So obviously this was a very lucrative. They made a lot of money and had a lot of goods exchanged flowing back and forth. But the downside was, and this is what you want to write down, is there were these things called monsoons. The monsoons are seasonal winds, and the winds would come at different times. Between April and September, because of the Coriolis effect, the way the Earth tilts, it changes, it shifts the wind patterns. And so the storms and stuff and the winds would come from this way and bring uh, wet air, and this would be their rainy season. So during the summer, our summer is when India gets its rain, especially in April and May. And this is when Bangladesh usually floods. But so then the monsoons change in the fall because the earth tilts. Then from November to February, the monsoons come this way. And so when you were going to sail from here to here, you kind of had to wait for a couple months until the wind was favorable. Otherwise, you'd never make it. So you had like a 6 month window. But the Indian people will use these winds to their advantage because you can always send a ship and get to Africa and then wait 6 months and then you can get back home. So these were called monsoons, seasonal windstorms, but they also helped make India a huge naval trade power, especially up to maybe from around during the Middle Ages at least, before the Portuguese showed up and whatnot. All right, so let's go back to Hinduism now. So let me activate the lines here. All right, India is not even, or it was not even. For the longest time, India was broken into what's called a caste system. That is a level, like a system of layers. So when Indian people were reincarnated, remember how I talked about the other day how when you get good karma, you would move up in your dharma? Well, there's different layers or levels, and so you want to draw a triangle and you want to have different layers or levels there. So then what I'm going to have you do is kind of fill them in as you go. At the top layer, at the very top, was called the Brahmin class or the priest class, and these people were considered like next to God. Like these. This would be the tip of the pyramid. And the Brahmins, again, remember the name Brahma is the creator, or the Brahmin is the God source. So the idea is you were godlike if you're up in this class. And so this would be the wealthy, the priest class, the ruler class, those types of people, royalty, whatnot. So if you were born into a Brahmin family, you were well to do and probably had a pretty good life. Now, the Indian people no longer have the caste system today, officially, because it's a free country and everyone's supposed to be equal. But in reality, it is still a very layered society. Brahmins still tend to marry and mix with Brahmin families, and you'll see that's still going to happen. The next layer is the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas are the warrior class. And if you were born into this family, you would be expected to follow the father's job. Like if you're a son and you're born into a family in India, it's usually assumed you will be then, like, you'll take on the family business. Or if your dad's a military person, you're expected to be in a military family and raise sons that will join the military, or daughters who will raise babies that will grow up to be future defenders of India. So the Kshatriyas are the warriors, and that was their duty, their dharma. Remember we talked about dharma. your life path. You're sort of selected for this as you're born. It's kind of like the birth lottery. I guess you hope to be a Brahmin. But anyway, Vaishyas, I'm sorry. Vaishyas are the middle class and the merchants. They own shops. They own farms. They have, like artisans would be like craftspeople, blacksmiths, carpenters, people with a skill, right? They're not some poor schmo on the street with, these guys are valuable. And so they're the middle class, okay? They're not quite in the upper class, but they're not in the bottom. You're going to see it gets lower here. Then you have the laborers, the next class. If you're born into this group, it's called the Sudras. And the Sudras are the servants, the low class, the laborers. These are the people that, would be out in the fields working for the Vaishyas. And again, if you're born into that family, no one up here will marry you because you kind of have to stay in your own level. That was the theory. We studied Middle Ages. When we studied Middle Ages, there was something like this. It's called a caste society, and we see them every now and then pop up in different cultures. But there's even someone lower than the low class, and these people are the bottom. They are called untouchables, and they make up 15% of India. And these are like street people, lepers, people who are viewed as unclean and unworthy to even be in the presence of the other castes. They are often given like a certain part of the town to stay in and live in, and it used to be in the old days that an untouchable was not even worthy to look at a Brahmin. Like they had to turn and look the other way, because lest they cast their gaze and basically, like insult the Brahmins or whatever. So if you were an untouchable, you were, kind of considered unclean, unworthy, and you were limited to very few jobs. You would only get hired to maybe handle garbage, clean the sewers, undertaking like taking care of dead bodies. You would get all the jobs that none of these other people wanted. And obviously, this is a pecking order, right? It's very cliquish. If you think Karn City's bad, go to India. India is all about different layers and groups of who's in and who's not. And if you're in this class, then, it's kind of sad because even to this day, India is supposed to be equal, but it still happens. So a couple things to note about caste. You were born into this caste. You cannot break out. You could marry down, but never marry. And why would you? I mean, if you're up here, you wouldn't want your family to lower their rank or status. And people up here will never accept you. So it'd be very hard to find someone up here that would marry someone from down here. So oftentimes, this is why our marriages were arranged too. You would make sure, you're picking someone in the same caste. If you're wondering how they know who's who, if you ever notice, India people have these little dots sometimes on their foreheads, and that's a marking point. That can show the color or the caste, or it can signal other things. Sometimes I've seen a jewel put there instead of a dot. It just depends on the part of India and what it can mean. And then the British tried to outlaw it. When the British took over India, they're like, look, guys, you're all Indians. Get over it. We're going to mix all the castes. And boy, did that go bad. India freaked out. And so India tried to make it no castes, but they learned that it was so ingrained with their religion. And, pretty much the view up here is these people down here earned themselves this ticket. If you had bad karma, you kept reincarnating down. So these people, the untouchables, they must have put themselves there, is the theory, because they are the ones who racked up bad karma, and they better get their act together so that they can reincarnate in the next level. Maybe you'll bump up. And we're getting to the last thing I should say before I get to the Brahmins and the gods, that it was outlawed in the 1950s when India became a free country. They're like, look, guys, everybody's got to be equal. You can't keep disparaging people. It's kind of racism. But informally, it still exists today because people still will, birds of a feather. They'll mix with their own kind. All right. So your question might be, okay, Mr. Farrell, let's say I get a good life. I get a lot of karma. I move up in my dharma. I keep bumping up each lifetime. I get up to Brahmins, and I get enough good karma, do I become a god? And the answer is, well, you do kind of get released. This is called moksha, and it's mentioned in your book. All right. If you get enough good karma and you get to the top of that pyramid, your soul is released from the cycle of rebirths. You don't have to keep coming back over and over and over again, which, is great because that means you are now free. Your soul gets to return back to the Brahman, back to the God source. It would be like the equivalent, I guess, of what other people call heaven, right? You're at one with God. So moksha is what the goal is of Hinduism. They're trying to, get through the cycles of rebirths, get to the highest level, and then when you learn all of the lessons that the universe is going to teach you, and you figured it all out, you basically, your soul is released, and you don't have to keep coming back over and over and over again. So moksha is the goal, and that's what the spirit's breaking out of the cycle. All right, and so where would you go? Well, you go back to the God source. What is the God source? It's really a state of being rather than a location, I guess, but it would be like happiness and bliss and peacefulness, and so we call it nirvana. And here I am putting a picture of a beach, because that would be my version of heaven. But the soul gets reunited with the universe to the giant self, or nirvana. And nirvana is defined as a place of peace and happiness, free from thought or pain. And it would be the nearest thing that we could call to the Hindu version of like a heaven, right? So put me on a beach, that's where I want to be, and that would be my version of heaven. Okay? All right, so that pretty much should wrap up the basics of Hinduism. There is a exit ticket that combines all 3 days of notes. So you'll want to go ahead, and if you missed any of those days, you best get those notes off a friend. And then you might want to look your notes over just to refresh your memory, and then put everything away and come back and get an exit ticket. And I'm going to see how well you were paying attention to my lectures. And good luck. All right? I think that's it.